Hi and welcome back to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. Today I want to give you a brief introduction to wire weaving. Now the weaving of wire can mean literally anything to do with putting bits of wire together with other bits of wire, and it can really be used in so many different ways as a faux floating bezel or to make a very simple ring, in so many aspects of wire work, right from the very simple pieces up through to your heady weave, pendant designs and ring designs which are much more intricate will require elements of wire weaving. So this video today is all about the absolute beginner's introduction to wire weaving. I've got a couple of samples which I'm going to show you how to achieve today, and these are sections that you will probably use over and over again. So just here we have a figure of 8 weave, which is a 0.4mm gauge wire woven around 2 open segments of 1mm gauge. And we've also got here a 7 and 2, which again is 0.4mm gauge wrapped around 2 lengths of 1mm gauge, but this time they are kind of close together, so I'm going to show you how to do both of these. And one of the reasons that we would use the figure of 8 weave is to create a decorative bail on our pendants. This is the first time that I personally had come into contact with wire weaving, was to create a pendant. So we're going to start with a couple of sections of the 1mm gauge. I've actually formed into a U shape, which I'll show you in just a second. And what I want to achieve here is to keep the 2 lines of 1mm gauge apart but parallel, so they're like tram lines or a train track, so that they remain the same distance apart all the way along. And to help me achieve this, I have kept that as one single piece of wire and just bent it into a U shape at the end. So you can see here this is one continuous length of 1mm gauge, just with that little shape on the end there, which will help me to handle this and make it stay in that parallel fashion. So I am right-handed dominant. Anything that you feel would be more useful to bring in the opposite direction, just reverse, so that if you're left dominant then you can do that in your own fashion. So for me, I'm going to take the 0.4mm gauge, in this case it's silver plated on copper, and I'm going to keep that in the bag, but I'm going to keep that on the reel, so it's under control, but it's not actually causing me too much aggro by flumping around all over the shop. So I'm going to start off by looking at the closed end, and I'm going to insert the wire up between those 2 central pieces, and I'm going to give myself a great start by anchoring that at one end, and I think I'm going to go around 4 times for this example. So I'm wrapping just around the one side. I've done that 4 times. I'm going to trim the tail, and as we always do with our wire, we're just going to smooth that around in the direction that the wire is travelling to get that to sit flat. Another tip that we've talked about before is having the pliers on one side of the base wire and on the other, so that they are diagonal or diametrically opposed, I think is the correct term. Could be wrong, don't quote me. So I've got a nice tidy little start on the one side. Now you can see here that my wire is coming down between the 2 heavier gauges. So I'm going to now take that around, up, just around the upper wire that we're looking at. If it helps you, you can just splay those end edges ever so slightly apart, and I'm going to circle 4 times around just the upper wire. Now I'm going to pinch that quite firmly in my non-dominant hand between thumb and forefinger to try and keep these parallel. You can use a ring clamp if you really want to, but for me to demonstrate this to you, I've just kept that U formation at the end and given that a very gentle hammering just to give it some rigidity. So the wire has come down the centre, so I'm now going to bring it all the way around the outside of the lower wire, and this is 1mm gauge going around the outside. 0.4mm gauge is doing all the hard work. 4 times around, and then that comes down the centre, underneath and around the top. So we're going to go around this again 4 times. 1, 2, 3 and 4, and you would just continue until you have enough of a length to achieve what you are looking to do. So I'm just going to pop this down for a second and show you what I have achieved earlier, and this is using 5 around the upper, then 5 around the lower. When I get to the end, I'm just going to trim the wire and just smooth that again. Now this, if you imagine that you had created this at the top of a pendant, can be used quite nicely to create a decorative bail, as we have done in this rose quartz pendant here. That's available as a project pack on my NuMonday store. So this has just been wrapped around a round form. In this instance, I think probably a pen. And then that gives me a really intricate looking, but very effective and really quite strong bail to work with. You can also use your back and forth, or your basket weave as it's sometimes known, to create a bezel around the outside of a gemstone. My dogs are joining in right now, but I'm just going to plough on through. So back to the hands, what you can do is pop this around a round form and then use it to create a bezel in which you can sit a coin bead or a nice slim cabochon, and then you can post your tail through the end here. I'm just going to grab my mandrel and just show you what I mean. So I'm going to create a round circular form here, drawing that back out slightly and then posting the tail through the end. And with some little work you can get that to be quite a nice shape, like so. You can pop that back on your mandrel and generate a lovely circular frame into which you can sit a coin shape. Just open it up slightly, allow your coin to sit inside, and then bring that back down again and close up the ends. If you wanted to just seal those over, we can bring that quite close, trim the ends away, turn those ends down, and you've got a sealed bezel or a bail or a ring, whatever you want to do. That's another use, but you can see how pretty it looks when you bring that into the circular form. The second beginner's introduction to wire weaving that I want to show you is a variation on a theme, and I have an example here. I'm just going to move my mandrel out of the way. In this instance, and I'll show you in just a second, I have created a very close tight weave, which again can be used for rings, it can be used for decorative bails, it can be used for enhancing your wire work. Basically anywhere that you could use a single wire, you can use then a double or a triple wire to further enhance the beauty of your designs. So this is what we're going to create, which is going to feature 7 wraps around one of the wires and then 2 wraps around both. So I refer to this as a 7-2. This can be done in basically any configuration that you prefer. If you think about the 5-2 diet, this is the kind of 5-2 that I like. 5 around one post and 2 around another. But in this instance, on the piece I'm showing you right now, we've gone for 7. And you can see that that again is going to actually bend quite nicely, because you're not overstressing that 1mm gauge wire. And what you can do with this design, if you prefer, is just drop that round ever so gently, and then you've got yourself a lovely floating or a faux bezel to sit around the outside of whatever you're working with. So I'm going to show you now how to achieve this second of our 2 beginners entry-level guide to wire weaving. So again, I'm working with my wire on the spool and in a bag just for ease. So I'm just going to draw this out of the way, sorry about the rustling. I'm going to start off by adding this to one of my sections of 1mm gauge wire, and I'm going to wrap that around a couple of times just to get an anchor point, give that a bit of a scooch up, and then I'm going to choose how many times I want to wrap around my first base wire. So as I said earlier on, this one was a 7-2, it could be 7 and 1, it could be 4 and 1, it could be really anything that you want it to be. Now you can alter how many wraps are around each piece as you move through the design, but I like to see the same pattern repeated. So the key here is that my wire has wrapped 7 times around the main frame and is underneath. So I'm going to introduce my second piece of 1mm gauge wire, and I'm going to wrap carefully around both of those heavy gauge wires now. So that's 1 and that's 2. And again, if you wanted to, you could just open out those end pieces to make your life slightly easier. So I'm now going to draw the wire. It's gone over the top and back up now between the top wire and the bottom wire. So again, once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 6 and 7, and you would just continue. We've got 7 around the upper wire, so we're now going to do 2 around both. The key with when you are winding the wire in this instance is not to draw those two 1mm gauge lengths of wire too closely together. If you put too much tension on them, you'll draw them together and you then won't be able to introduce the 0.4mm gauge wire between them. So if I had over tightened, I would really struggle to get that wire up the centre. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7 over the top. Scooch those up nice and tightly together, and I'm just going to give that a little gentle squeeze, very, very gently, just to keep that nice taut look that is kind of machined, like a machined bezel, and you can continue on in much the same way. So I'm just going to draw a halt to the demonstration there, so you can see how easy and quick it is to work with your wire weaving, and all kinds of applications that you can use those for. I hope that you've enjoyed this beginner's introduction to wire weaving, and I will be back shortly with another demonstration taking your wire weaving just a few steps further. I'll see you soon.